The courtroom exuded an unnerving silence as 5-year-old Emily Carter entered through the heavy wooden doors, her tiny hand grasping the leash of Rex, a German shepherd adorned with a long, jagged scar running along his side. Every gaze in the room followed the little girl as she cautiously made her way toward the witness stand, her movements tentative yet resolute. Judge Mark Sullivan, a seasoned man with years of legal acumen, leaned forward slightly, studying the child with a contemplative gaze. He understood that the entire case's burden rested upon her fragile shoulders. Emily was the only witness to an attempted abduction, a case that had the potential to imprison a dangerous man for life. However, there was one issue. Since the attack, Emily had not uttered a single word. At the defense table, Richard Hale sat with a composed, even smug, expression, a 45-year-old software engineer who appeared unremarkable. Hale was arrested following an eyewitness's identification placing him at the scene of Emily's attempted abduction. However, his defense was strong: no physical evidence, no confession, and a witness unable to testify. His lawyer had already devised a strategy focused on undermining the traumatized child's capacity to identify him. Then, something pivotal occurred. After Emily took her seat in the witness chair, her green eyes locked onto Richard Hale's. Her small fingers quivered as they made a barely perceptible movement, almost undetectable to the untrained observer. It was a silent signal, one she had learned over weeks of therapy. Only two beings in the room noticed it: Rex and Judge Sullivan. Rex's response was immediate. The moment Emily's fingers twitched during that silent plea for help, the dog's body stiffened, ears perked forward, muscles tensing like a coiled spring. A low, guttural growl emerged from deep within his chest, a sound of warning, a sound of recognition. His golden brown eyes fixed on Hale, unwavering and piercing. This reaction sent a wave of unease coursing through the courtroom, and a murmur spread among the spectators, whispers of speculation permeating the atmosphere. Something about the dog's behavior resonated. This wasn't merely a well-trained support animal responding to his handler's distress, but rather something primal. Judge Sullivan's hand came down sharply on the gavel, the crack echoing like thunder in the room. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, his voice unusually urgent. The prosecutor, Jenna Collins, shot him a questioning look, but he didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he cast a glance at Emily, who was clinging to Rex as if he were a lifeline. Something significant had occurred, and he needed to comprehend it fully before the trial could proceed any further. As the courtroom emptied, Sullivan remained seated, his mind racing. Over the years on the bench, he had witnessed many things, but he had never seen a therapy dog react with such definitive certainty. What had Rex recognized? And more critically, what did that imply for the case? Outside in the hallway, Emily knelt beside Rex, her small hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, knelt beside her, smoothing the child's curly hair with trembling fingers. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she whispered. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her hold on Rex tightened, her small frame pressing against his side. Jack Monroe, the lead investigator on the case, observed from a few steps away, a seasoned FBI agent with decades of experience. Monroe's gut instinct had served him well through the years. Right now, it told him that whatever had just transpired in that courtroom was a game-changer. He stepped closer to Judge Sullivan. "Something spooked that dog," he murmured, his voice low. "I'd bet my badge he recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan exhaled slowly, narrowing his sharp blue eyes. "Then we need to find out where." Meanwhile, within the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat across from his attorney, Michael Graves. As soon as they were alone, the smug confidence on Hale's face morphed into something colder. His fingers drummed against the table as he replayed that moment in his mind. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog, that dog had reacted. "She knows," he muttered under his breath. Graves raised an eyebrow. "What?" Hale forced a small smile. "Nothing," he said. But his mind was racing. That damned dog. He hadn't anticipated the animal would pose a problem. Yet now he realized Rex could be the key to unraveling everything. As the recess neared its end, Judge Sullivan straightened his robes and inhaled deeply. He didn't believe in coincidences. And at that moment, something told him that Rex had just provided them with the most critical clue of the trial. It was time to dig deeper. And for the first time since the case commenced, he sensed the tide shifting. Before the silence in the courtroom, before the terror that had stolen her voice, Emily Carter was a vibrant chatterbox of a child. At 5 years old, she radiated with endless stories, her bright blue eyes shining with curiosity and mischief. She adored fairy tales, stuffed animals, and the way her mother read bedtime stories with distinct voices for each character. Fear had never visited her until that fateful afternoon. It had been a flawless spring day, the kind where the scent of blooming flowers swirled through the air, and the warm sun painted golden streaks across the backyard. From the kitchen window, Sarah Carter had watched her daughter, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips as Emily twirled in the yard, her pink dress flaring like a dancer's. David Carter was scheduled to come home in a few hours, and she was debating whether to begin dinner or wait for him. It should have been an ordinary afternoon. It should have been safe. At 3:42 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. It was her sister calling from out of state, and she stepped inside for what she thought would be a brief conversation. 4 minutes, that was all it took. When she returned to the yard, the gate was ajar. A wave of cold terror surged through her veins. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the area where her daughter had been. Emily was still there, but she wasn't alone. A black van idled near the curb, its side door slightly open. A man knelt beside Emily, a smile unervingly warm. "I have puppies in my van," he was saying, his voice smooth and practiced. "Special ones. They need a little girl to take care of them. Would you like to see?" Sarah's world seemed to come to a standstill, her instincts screaming before her mind could process what was occurring. "Emily!" Her voice sliced through the air. In an instant, the man's head snapped up. His smile disappeared, replaced by something sharp and calculating. With one swift motion, he seized Emily's arm. She froze. She didn't scream or fight. She simply stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, as if some deep-rooted fear had paralyzed her. Across the street, Martha Jenkins, a retired nurse walking her terrier, witnessed the entire ordeal. "Hey, get away from that child!" Her voice, weathered with age yet strong with conviction, rang out. The man hesitated, loosening his grip for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. Emily yanked her arm free and bolted toward her mother. Sarah scooped her daughter into her arms just as the van's engine roared. The tires screeched against the pavement as the vehicle sped away, leaving black streaks on the road. Sarah hugged Emily tightly, her heart racing against her ribs. But Emily didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She merely buried her face into her mother's shoulder and trembled. The police arrived within minutes. Detective Jack Monroe, a seasoned investigator from the FBI's Child Abduction Task Force, took immediate control of the scene. His graying hair and sharp brown eyes hinted at years spent chasing shadows and seeking out missing children who were often never found. He had witnessed this pattern all too often. "He fits the profile," Monroe muttered, flipping through a worn notebook. 4 children have disappeared in the last 18 months, all approached near their homes, all lured by promises of puppies. His partner, Agent Lisa Grant, knelt beside Emily, her voice gentle yet firm. "Sweetheart, do you remember what the man looked like?" Silence enveloped the girl. Sarah brushed Emily's hair back, her hands trembling. "Honey, it's okay. You're safe now. Can you tell the nice officer what he looked like?" Emily's small hands tightened around her mother's sweater, but she didn't speak. She didn't nod or shake her head. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, shutting off her ability to voice her thoughts. She hasn't said a word since I picked her up, Sarah whispered, fear creeping into her voice. She just won't talk. Agent Grant exchanged a glance with Monroe. Selective mutism, she murmured, a trauma response. Monroe sighed, rubbing his temple. Without a statement, we don't have much. The description is vague. A man. A black van. It could be anyone. Martha Jenkins, who had witnessed the abduction attempt, stepped forward. I got part of the license plate, she stated firmly. The first 3 letters, YKZ. Monroe's gaze snapped to her. That's something. Sarah, still clinging to Emily, felt a surge of helplessness. Her once vibrant daughter had retreated into herself, and in the days that followed, it only worsened. Emily ceased playing, stopped drawing, and refused to leave the house, flinching at the sight of passing cars. She hardly slept, and when she did, her nights were plagued by silent nightmares, her small body thrashing against unseen foes, her screams never breaking free, only gasps of terror waking her parents in the dead of night. Desperate, Sarah and David tried everything: story time, favorite foods, her beloved stuffed bunny. Nothing worked. The child they once knew was fading further away. One evening, Sarah sat across from David at the kitchen table, her eyes hollow from exhaustion. The therapist recommended a support animal. She said quietly, "A therapy dog." David ran a weary hand through his hair. "Do you really think that'll help?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I'm willing to try anything." Neither could have anticipated how much that decision would alter their lives because, while Emily had lost her voice, there was someone who could still hear her, and his name was Rex. The air inside Dr. Laura Bennett's Animal Rehabilitation Center was thick with the scents of antiseptic and the earthy musk of fur. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the occasional scratching of claws against the tiled floor. On a large orthopedic bed near the window lay a German shepherd, still yet alert. His deep brown eyes tracked every movement with quiet intensity. His name was Rex. Once, he had been one of the top K-9 officers in the police force, his instincts and training saving lives. But now, he bore the deep scars of sacrifice, notably a jagged mark running down his right flank, a permanent reminder of the night that ended his career. 3 years ago, during a raid to rescue a kidnapped child, Rex lunged at an armed suspect without hesitation. The man had slashed at him with a knife intended for an officer, cutting deep into Rex's flesh. Though Rex subdued the suspect, blood darkened his fur, and in the subsequent months, the injury never fully healed. His mobility was compromised, and with the department strapped for funds, he was retired. He had been placed on a euthanasia list, deemed unfit for service, until Laura stepped in. Dr. Bennett had run the therapy animal program for years, focusing on cases where animals could aid trauma survivors. Upon hearing about Rex's story, she fought to adopt him, believing his sharp mind and unwavering loyalty still held value. She was about to test that belief. Sarah Carter sat nervously in a chair, fingers gripping the fabric of her skirt. Emily stood behind her, peeking out from her mother's shoulder. The little girl had remained silent since the incident 2 weeks prior, and despite attending therapy, nothing had coaxed a word from her. Laura knelt to Emily's level, her voice gentle. "Hi, Emily. My name is Laura. I work with very special dogs that help kids who have gone through scary things." Emily didn't respond. Her green eyes flickered over to the large German shepherd a few feet away. Rex sat patiently, ears perked forward but making no move toward her, simply watching with steady, non-threatening presence. "Would you like to meet him?" Laura asked. The little girl didn't answer, but she didn't run away either. That was a start. Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair. "He's a very nice dog, sweetheart. He used to be a police dog, just like the ones in your storybooks." Laura gestured toward Rex and issued a quiet command, "Stay." The German shepherd didn't flinch. Turning back to Emily, she said, You don't have to come close if you don't want to. Rex will wait right here. But if you feel ready, you can put out your hand, and he'll come to you." After a moment of hesitation, Emily remained frozen. But slowly she began emerging from behind her mother. Her tiny hand lifted, hesitant yet deliberate. Rex remained still, awaiting the final cue. When Laura nodded, he lowered his head and took a careful step forward. Then another and another. The moment his warm breath grazed Emily's palm, something shifted. Emily's fingers curled slightly, brushing through the dog's thick fur. The connection had been forged. Sarah gasped softly, pressing her hand to her mouth. It was the first time Emily had reached out to anything or anyone since the attack. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she whispered, "Oh, baby." Emily's small fingers burrowed deeper into Rex's fur, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had become terrifyingly uncertain. Laura smiled. "That's a good girl, Emily. Rex likes you." The child remained silent but didn't let go. In the weeks following, Rex and Emily became inseparable. At home, she would sit by him for hours, her tiny hands tracing the scar along his side. When nightmares jolted her awake in the middle of the night, it was Rex's steady heartbeat that calmed her. Though she still refused to speak, she began to draw again, simple crayon pictures of a girl and a dog standing together against shadowy figures. One afternoon, while sitting on the floor of Laura's office, Emily was watching Rex perform a simple trick when something remarkable occurred. "Good boy," she whispered. The words were so soft, Sarah briefly believed she'd imagined them. However, when she turned to look, she saw Emily staring at Rex, her lips slightly parted in wonder, as though she too had surprised herself. Tears brimmed in Sarah's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Laura placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "She trusts him," she murmured. "Sometimes, trust is the first step toward finding your voice again." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Then we'll follow wherever that trust leads." And it would lead them to a courtroom where a monster would finally be unmasked. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension as seats in the gallery filled with journalists, families, and legal observers, all waiting in anticipation for one of the most high-profile trials in recent memory to begin. At the center of the room, the defendant, Richard Hale, sat beside his attorney, his expression unreadable. Despite the gravity of the charges against him, he appeared disturbingly calm, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished wood of the defense table. Seated beside her mother, Emily Carter clutched Rex's leash tightly, her small fingers wrapped around the thick fabric as if it were a lifeline. The German shepherd sat alert beside her, ears pricked forward, his deep brown eyes locked on Hale. Every so often, his nose would twitch, as though he was sensing something familiar in the air. "All rise." The bailiff's voice rang through the chamber as Judge Mark Sullivan entered, his robe flowing behind him. He took his seat at the elevated bench, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling briefly on Emily and Rex. He had already made a ruling permitting the therapy dog to be present, but he understood that this decision was far from universally accepted. "Before we proceed with opening statements," Sullivan said, his deep voice measured and controlled, "the court will hear arguments regarding the presence of the support animal in these proceedings." Michael Graves, the defense attorney, rose smoothly from his seat, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor," he began, his tone polite but assertive, "while we comprehend the prosecution's argument for emotional support, the presence of this animal is highly prejudicial. A large German shepherd in the courtroom may evoke an emotional response from the jury that could unfairly bias them against my client. We request that the dog be removed during testimony." Jenna Collins, the lead prosecutor, immediately stood in response. "Your Honor, Emily Carter is 5 years old and a trauma survivor. She has been diagnosed with selective mutism as a consequence of her experience. Rex is not here as a spectacle. He is here as a medically necessary support animal. His presence allows Emily to participate in these proceedings without undue distress." Judge Sullivan leaned back in his chair. Expression unreadable. I have already reviewed the documentation submitted by the child psychologist and the animal behaviorist. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, some in agreement, others grumbling under their breath. Graves pressed his lips together, displeased but unwilling to continue the argument. He returned to his seat, casting a quick glance at Hale, who remained eerily expressionless. The trial commenced in earnest. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Hale's actions, a pattern of manipulation, deception, and predatory behavior extending over years. Witnesses were presented, including the elderly neighbor Martha Jenkins, who recounted the terrifying moment she observed Hale attempting to lure Emily into his van. Her voice trembled as she described how he grabbed the child's arm before fleeing when confronted. Throughout it all, Emily remained silent, her small frame dwarfed by the large wooden chair. Her fingers occasionally flexed around the leash but never let go. Whenever the tension became overwhelming, she looked down at Rex, who stayed perfectly still, his quiet presence grounding her. Then, it was time for her testimony. A hush fell over the courtroom as Emily was gently guided to the witness stand. Sarah Carter walked beside her, keeping a protective gaze on her daughter. She helped Emily into the seat before stepping away, even as her every muscle battled with the urge to scoop her daughter into her arms and take her far from that place. Jenna Collins approached cautiously, her demeanor gentle and warm. "Hi, Emily," she said with a soft smile. "I know this is a little scary, but remember you don't have to say anything you don't want to. You can just nod or shake your head if you feel more comfortable. And if you ever need a break, you can let us know." Emily didn't look at her. Her gaze was fixated on the table, her breathing shallow. However, sensing her unease, Rex pressed his body lightly against her leg. She reached down and gripped a handful of his fur. Slowly, she nodded. "Good," Jenna said, keeping her voice light. "Emily, can you tell us who was with you in your yard that day?" Emily hesitated, not lifting her head, but after a long moment, she slowly raised her arm and pointed directly at Richard Hale. The defendant's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief, involuntary tightening of his jaw. Graves immediately stood. "Objection! The child has been repeatedly shown images of my client prior to trial. This identification is unreliable." Judge Sullivan held up a hand. "Overruled. The jury will determine the credibility of the witness." Jenna continued. "Emily, did this man say anything to you that day?" Instead of speaking, Emily made a small motion with her hand, a subtle sign, the same signal she had provided previously, understood by Rex. The German shepherd responded at once. His ears snapped forward, muscles tensed, and a deep growl rumbled from his chest. It wasn't aggressive. It was a warning. The reaction sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Even Judge Sullivan leaned forward, brow furrowed. Graves stood again, this time more urgently. "Your Honor, I object." This is theatrical, but Sullivan wasn't listening. He was focused on Rex. The dog had remained utterly still, entire attention fixed on Hale, almost as if recognizing a scent only he could detect. It was the same reaction he had exhibited when Emily first encountered Hale, the same primal, instinctual response. A thought struck Sullivan, and he turned to Jenna. "Miss Collins," he inquired, his voice measured, "has this animal had any prior interaction with the defendant?" Jenna hesitated. "Not to my knowledge, Your Honor." Sullivan turned to the defense table. "Mr. Hale, have you encountered this dog before?" For the first time, Hale displayed real emotion. His fingers, which had tapped calmly earlier, clenched into a fist. He was silent, and then Jenna's eyes widened as a sudden realization hit her. She turned to her co-counsel and whispered something quickly. A moment later, a member of the prosecution team rushed out of the courtroom. "What's going on?" Graves demanded, his patience waning. Jenna straightened, her expression unreadable. Your Honor, I request a short recess. There may be new evidence relevant to this case. Judge Sullivan studied her for a prolonged moment before nodding. 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, whispers filled the air, speculation spreading like wildfire. Had Rex just recognized Richard Hale? And if so, from where? Something told Judge Sullivan that the answer to that question would change everything. The weight of the case pressed heavily on the prosecution team as new developments materialized. Richard Hale had been officially linked to multiple disappearances. Yet without Emily's full testimony, the trial teetered on uncertainty. However, what no one anticipated was that the key to unraveling the case would not come from the child, but from the German shepherd who never left her side. The morning was crisp as the prosecution team, led by Jenna Collins, presented their next motion to introduce new forensic evidence. Soil samples discovered in Richard Hale's van were analyzed, and the results pointed to a specific location, a remote, unoccupied cabin in the northern woods. Detective Jack Monroe, having worked on similar cases for years, understood what this could imply. Your Honor, Collins addressed Judge Sullivan. We request a 24-hour recess to follow up on a crucial lead. We believe this evidence may provide the final piece needed to close this case. Michael Graves, Hale's defense attorney, immediately objected. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a delay tactic. My client has already faced extensive questioning, and there is no solid evidence linking him to this so-called cabin. Soil samples are circumstantial at best. Judge Sullivan's stern gaze silenced Graves. Motion granted, he ruled. The prosecution has 24 hours. Court adjourned. As soon as the judge's gavel struck, Monroe and his team mobilized. Rex, Emily's ever-watchful protector, was taken along for the operation. His reaction to Hale had been unmistakable. Perhaps he sensed something that human eyes had missed. By early afternoon, the search team arrived at the desolate cabin. The place was eerily silent, the surrounding trees whispering in the wind. A thick blanket of dust covered the porch, yet faint footprints leading toward the back door indicated recent activity. Rex was the first to react. As they approached the cabin, the dog's ears perked, and his nose twitched with keen intensity. His body stiffened, tail erect, muscles posed like coiled springs. He emitted a low growl, pacing anxiously at the entrance. This place is wrong, Monroe murmured. Rex knows something's here. Proceeding cautiously with weapons drawn, the team entered the cabin. It was sparsely furnished, a table, a cot, empty food cans stacked in a corner. However, Monroe soon noticed something unusual. The wooden floor near the back wall had an unnatural seam, a faint indentation that appeared out of place. Knocking on it produced a hollow sound. There's something under here, he stated with swift precision. The officers pried the boards loose, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into a hidden basement. The air turned cold and damp as they descended, dim light unveiling a horrific sight. Children's belongings, old toys, small shoes, a faded pink backpack. In the farthest corner, chained but still alive, was a girl, Emma Sullivan. The 8-year-old girl who had been missing for 6 months appeared pale and ragged, but her eyes filled with tears of recognition and relief upon seeing the officers. Help, she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Rex reacted immediately, straining against his leash and whining as if sensing the suffering this child had endured. Monroe rushed forward, unlocking the chains and scooping Emma into his arms. You're safe now, he assured her. We've got you. Emma clung to him, her frail body trembling. The search had finally concluded, but the nightmare wasn't finished yet. Back at the courthouse, news of Emma's rescue spread like wildfire. The gallery was packed as Collins prepared for the final strike against Hale. The judge permitted Emma's discovery to be introduced as evidence, alongside the soil sample linking the cabin to Hale's vehicle. Mr. Hale, Collins addressed the defendant, her voice sharp as steel. How do you explain the presence of an abducted child locked in a basement on a property directly tied to you? For the first time, Richard Hale appeared shaken. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Jenna pressed forward, her tone unwavering. Your DNA was found on the chains. Your vehicle's tires match the tracks outside the cabin. And more importantly, Emma Sullivan is alive, meaning she can testify against you. The weight of those words enveloped the courtroom like a shroud. A single survivor meant a witness capable of dismantling Hale's defense. Hale's carefully constructed composure began to crack, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. It was evident he was cornered. Then, it happened once more. Rex, lying at Emily's feet, suddenly lifted his head, narrowing his eyes at Hale. His hackles rose, a deep growl vibrating through his chest. The room fell silent as the German shepherd took slow, deliberate steps forward, gaze affixed on the defendant, a look of recognition. Hale flinched. Everyone witnessed it. The man who had maintained his arrogance throughout the trial was now visibly sweating, gripping the table edge with white-knuckled hands. He turned to his attorney, muttering frantically. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I want to change my plea." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Judge Sullivan's gaze darkened. "Mr. Hale, are you stating that you wish to plead guilty?" The room held its collective breath as Hale exhaled shakily. "Yes." The trial's abrupt conclusion sent shockwaves across the nation. Richard Hale was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his conviction sealing the fate of a man who had terrorized families for years. However, the true heroes of the case were not just the lawyers or detectives, but instead a brave 5-year-old girl who found her courage and a dog who never abandoned her. In the days following the sentencing, Emily spoke her first words in weeks. Holding Rex's face in her small hands, she whispered, "Thank you." Her parents wept, knowing that their daughter was finally finding her way back to them. And as Rex wagged his tail, nuzzling her gently, it became clear that some bonds were unbreakable. No matter how dark the world grew, there would always be those willing to stand against the darkness, even if they walked on 4 legs.